what is energy healing? It is the way that we use consciousness or awareness to interface with the body to promote healing. We know that the body is an innocent reflection of our consciousness. So it goes to follow that if consciousness can be handled effectively, then the body can enjoy better health. It's especially evident when illnesses rise up from inside, right? If the body was healthy and then all of a sudden it starts to grow something that shouldn't be growing or something like that, or there's some area of weakness. Let's say every time you do a certain action, some part of the body hurts or something like that. It's more evident that something's gone awry inside the body, that it's some kind of self-referral process that's given rise to that problem. It's less obvious in cases of, like, if you have an accident or something, or like something from the outside comes in. However, the way we interact with our environment is also very much a reflection of what's going on the inside. So ultimately, the healing solutions still come from the inner reality. And so in energy healing, we're really digging into that process, understanding it intimately, and working with it directly to promote better results for the health, for the life experience, for everything. Relationships, finances, everything. So thank you for being with me on this interesting journey. And of course, I'll try to explain more as I go along as well. All right. Why we go into 3 minutes of silence is because the inner landscape of the soul includes your anchor to the source of creation. Your anchor to your source. Like everything in the universe comes from the one eternal, unbounded, quality-less source of creation. And that connection's really important. So it is probably the foundation for all energy healing. Therefore, we always take a few minutes at the beginning of our live webinars to just enjoy the direct experience of that connection. All right, and for those of you, if you're not sure how that works or how that goes, don't mind, just enjoy the quiet. When I ask you to open the eyes at the end of 3 minutes, definitely take as much time as you need to gently, gracefully, comfortably come out slowly, because the slower we come out of the silence, the more we integrate the silence. And the whole premise, one of the main premises of energy healing, is more expression of that silent source of creation in this material level of creation. So coming out slow is good. All right. So let's close our eyes. I'm going to mute myself. Let's take a few moments and then slowly open the eyes. Thank you to the source of creation for being everything, for being each person in this live webinar, and for being the whole universe. Thank you for being the eternal tradition of wisdom, which connects the unmanifest absolute source of creation with the entire manifest field of creation. Thank you for our live webinar hour, that we may use it in the most profound, powerful way, in the highest good, going always to the seed or source or root of a problem or imbalance and addressing that in the way that really completely turns it around, turns it back to the highest. Thank you, everyone, for being with me. All right, so today's topic is, yes, I will record this for you, and everybody will get copies of both today's session and tomorrow's session, even if you're only present at one of them. Thanks for asking. I will be taking most of the questions, though, at the end, and some questions have come in on the emails ahead of time, and I would not be surprised if some questions come in as a result of today's presentation. So let's just talk for a minute about how we use consciousness to affect change in the past or the future. Consciousness is, we could call it pure awareness. You can also call consciousness pure awareness. Is unbounded. It is the very stuff of which the source of creation is comprised. Consciousness shows up, the source of creation shows up in varying forms, various forms. But in its essential nature, it knows no bounds. So what that means is that consciousness can easily move through space and time without restriction, frictionlessly. Wherever consciousness goes, it creates an effect. It brings the qualities or values of the source of creation with it. Even though I said the source of creation is quality-less, not to be stepping on my own points, but the principle here is that the source of creation is full. It is fullness. It is fullness, it is totality, it is wholeness. Have you ever heard the saying, health is wholeness, right? Health is balance in the body, but it's wholeness. It's establishing wholeness in the system. So that wholeness comes. And it's an abstract thing. When wholeness comes, it comes in its essential form, its quality-less form. the awareness goes, and it just wakes up that wholeness. But when awareness interacts with the field of differences, with the field, the manifest field of creation, the material field of creation, it kind of like splinters. It splinters. And it shows up in different values. And wholeness shows up to create balance, whatever is needed. So awareness, and that's why we have pain, right? If you have pain, your awareness goes to the part that's hurting. And when your awareness goes on the part that hurts, the awareness, like, it naturally, spontaneously starts to make that area feel a little better, because it's creating balance. It's wholeness, so it's bringing the part that's missing, essentially. It's bringing the missing part. And that's why, like, if you hurt a part, you always put your hand, right? You put your hand there. Why do we put our hand there? Because the hands are one of the instruments of our physiology that support the channeling of awareness. Awareness channels through the palms of the hands, through the tips of the fingers. So if you hurt something, right away you put your hand there. That helps bring the awareness in. All right, so awareness can travel through space and time, and it can travel to the past. And it can travel to the time of the early childhood, which is what we're looking at today. And some questions go all the way back to in utero, and then all the way back before that. Awareness from the present, filtered through the present physiology, travels to the past. And the present is always a more evolved state than the past, right? Because through time, through the sequence as consciousness starts to interact with time, it splinters apart into pieces, and it starts to show up in this, it starts to show up as an evolving form. So we're evolving, and in the present we are more evolved than we were in the past, and in the future we're more evolved than we are now. So from the present moment, you are more evolved than you were in the past, and you can bring solace, you can bring wisdom, you can bring understanding to those situations and times of the past where the experience was difficult or confusing or camouflaged. Your wholeness was camouflaged. The way awareness travels through this reality is over threads or streams at the astral level of the physiology. So what we've got going on here is kind of like a diagram showing the relationship between the more manifest, dense level of creation all the way down to the unmanifest source of creation. And the unmanifest source of creation is represented here by numbers 7 and 8. And if you look in there at number 5, 6, 7, and 8 all represent the levels of consciousness that are unconstrained, that are unbound by space and time. Oh, I can point with I bet you can see my pointer, huh? So the astral body here at 5, this is where our world shows up as threads of consciousness, or threads of expression, of moving, consciousness moving. So down here at 7 and 8, nothing is manifest. It's very quiet. And at the causal level, there are spaces that hum. But those humming spaces interact together to give rise to a kind of movement of consciousness. And so really moving consciousness is what we get at the astral level. So at the astral level, we pick up these threads that can take awareness anywhere. And you might think, well, how do I pick up threads? How do I pick up threads? Like, pick up threads of consciousness? What? But the thing is, you do it so spontaneously and so naturally that you don't even realize you're doing it. Like, if you think, I'm going to go to the store, a thread of consciousness goes from you, from the level of your intention, which is usually in the head area somewhere, to the store, like that. I'm going to the store. I'm going for a walk. Comes out of usually the belly area, or the part of the body, the solar plexus. I'm going for a walk. And what that does is it ensures that if you're going for a walk, you don't end up in the wrong place, that you don't end up doing something else that you had not intended to do. Or you go to the store, it means that you don't end up at the school or somewhere where you can't buy groceries. So, so we do it all the time. We send threads of consciousness. Oh, I'm thinking about someone I love. Oh, I'm thinking about someone I love. It just goes. It just goes to them. It's very spontaneous, very beautiful. So I'm thinking about, we think and we put attention back into the early layers of childhood. And it's important at this point to give you a little illustration of the value of the childhood experience. We all know that experiences that we have in early childhood tend to sit at kind of a deep level of our awareness and experience as adults. Like an event will occur in early childhood, and the child will analyze the event and make an assumption from that event about themselves. They'll think, well, because this thing happened, it shows that if I want to make things happen in the world, if I want to control my world and come up with some kind of success, it's important for me to, apply my intelligence, for example, or it's important for me to be charming, or it's important for me to be helpful, right? And so then what happens is that belief or that little idea gets in there, gets lodged into the self, and then it becomes part of oneself. And it's like, well, I'm a helpful person. Oh yes, well, I'm a helpful person. Because somewhere along the line when I was like 2, I realized that if I was helpful to with mommy and daddy, that they would let me have my way with things, something like that. And once the idea or the belief gets lodged in as an expression of one's own innate nature, and we become identified with it, of, oh, well, that's just the kind of person I am, then it tends to get covered up and we grow up around it. The soul, the being grows up around it. It develops all kinds of habits and beliefs and ways of functioning and ways of thinking about oneself and fears like, well, if I'm not like that, then I'm not going to get what I want. Things, ideas like that. So boundaries and limitations start to build up around these beliefs about who one is, about one's sense of self. And this principle of the sense of self being the fundamental underlying aspect of our inner landscape, it underlies all the other types of choices and decisions and ways that we spontaneously, unconsciously respond to situations and so forth. That premise that it's who you know yourself to be is the fundamental. That's a really important premise in energy healing. And what I found when it comes to dynamic change and dynamic self-change and powerful autonomy over your own healing process, that your ability to rewrite or to redefine who you are is the most powerful thing you have. I need to say that again because that's so good. Your ability to redefine who you are is the most powerful tool that you have to heal yourself. You can quote me. Okay, so in the energy healing sessions, we start with a symptom and we work our way in and in and in and in. And eventually, when we come down to the seed core of what is that problem or what is that suffering, it always comes down to a belief about oneself or a kind of definition of oneself that doesn't incorporate your full potential, that doesn't reflect your true essential nature, your true divine nature, the source of creation. the source of creation that is at the foundation of all of us. Some area where we're thinking of ourselves not so much in the light of totality and wholeness, but more in the light of being separated from totality and wholeness. So energy healing, again and again, comes back to this one principle: reestablishing wholeness, reestablishing the sense of self in terms of pure divine truth, divine grace, divine being, transcendental wholeness, unbounded awareness, pure awareness, etc., etc. And that's who you really are. And when you experience that, you know, ah, yes, this is me feeling in my most natural self. And everything else is less natural than that. It can happen that the separation from that totality, that wholeness, can occur in like isolated areas of oneself. It's not just like all of me is separated from wholeness. It's like parts of me have figured out how to stabilize that connection, and parts of my nervous system have adapted around that experience. And so I own it both as a direct experience, and I own it also as a physiological reality. But at the same time, that's going on in some areas. In other areas, it can also happen that there are other areas that don't feel whole, that don't feel connected. So when a baby first comes into the world, they don't know anything but unity. They just think that they're kind of like an appendage of their world, like the whole world is one, and they're just part of it. And, you know, a lot of times if you pick up a baby, they'll just like melt onto your body, and they're just like, well, I just am part of your body. They just think they're part of mama's body or something, you know? It's very beautiful. But there does come a point where the baby realizes that they're not. And that point is different for different people, very much depending upon, among other things, and this I'm just starting to read now into our collective, among other things, how soon you were set to sleep on your own. How soon you were put away in another room, alone, in the dark, to sleep. For hundreds of thousands of years, or maybe millions of years, babies slept in the arms of their mothers. They always slept close to mother or someone. They always slept touching someone. It's only been in since like the mid-1800s that the style of putting babies off alone, separate, and training them to sleep on their own has become a thing. Before that, it wasn't a thing. I would say it's one of the first stresses that a person experiences, is that feeling of being very vulnerable. When children get bigger and they misbehave, it's a fairly common practice now, at least in the West, to put the kids in timeout. And when you take a baby and you put them in a room alone by themselves, it's like timeout, really. Only it's not seen as a punishment. It's just seen as like, that's just the way you treat babies, right? Why is that a good punishment for young kids? Because survival back in the day depended on closeness to the tribe, to the collective. Even parent horses. In wild horse communities, if a young colt has misbehaved, the colt is made to go away from the group and be over on its own. And let me tell you, it's terrifying. It's terrifying to be a little horse and to be made to I can't be with all the other horsies. Very quickly, They figure out what they did wrong. they, they feel remorse and they cry out to mama, okay, I'm sorry. I'll be good now. I won't nip at somebody's tail or whatever they were doing. It's terrifying. It's terrifying to be really tiny and really vulnerable and on your own. I think those who determine what is the style of the day either were never parents in the first place, or if they were parents, they were somehow not aware of how terrifying it is to be alone, especially in the dark at night, and you're little. In previous webinars, we've done deep healings for night terrors for children. So I'm thinking, because we've covered that topic, maybe we don't need to go into great detail. Now I speak to my husband, who's helping me. My dear, if we could find, have we uploaded that segment from previous webinars? Have we uploaded it as a separate one? I think we have. No, we didn't. We need to upload that one. That's a good one. Or I just do it again, but. Right. He's not sure we can find it. Many hours of Dorothy speaking and doing healings on many topics. What we're doing here is, because that's a big healing and that could take long time and all that. What I'm doing now is I'm going just into the silence of my being and offering this healing. It's a whole package, and we've already done it. So it's already formed. It's already a formed package. And just going into the silence of wholeness or totality and offering it to everybody in this healing session as a download. That healing. The way the healing came about, I remember it quite well actually, was that as a little teeny tiny person, you were able to draw upon the wisdom and the comfort and the compassion and the love of your future self to come and sit with you at night when you're alone in the dark. To just sit with you, to bear with you, and hold you in the grace, in divine grace. And to create circles of protection, like matrices, protection matrices, around your little teeny tiny body, so that you are embraced in a blanket of protection and comfort. And you feel that presence. The important thing is that the baby wants to feel the presence of the mother with them, even if it ends up being more like the mother of creation through you, or yourself being that mother to yourself, something like that. And it's possible with consciousness to go back into the annals of time and those moments in the early childhood and isolate out all the specific moments where you might have experienced something like a night terror, and just hold that space for yourself. Hug yourself, hold yourself, love yourself. Whisper, I am here and I am protecting you and I love you and I'm not going to let any darkness come to you. Even though it's dark, we're not going to let any kind of dark, scary energies come. Only just soft light, the soft, sweet light of the love of the mother of creation. Sometimes mother can't be mother. She can't be a mother. So then the individual has to be the mother for them, or father. Sometimes the mother or the father or members of the family are not functional. And then the individual has to fill in the blank for themselves. Doing that is so sweet. You might feel, even as we're talking about how the heart energy center kind of blossoms open and nurtures, it flows the intelligence, just like you can You can make a little line of intelligence coming out of your forehead or your head. Oh, I'm going to go to the swimming pool now. Something like that. You can make this little impulse of compassion and love emerge from the heart energy center, and the intention to embrace the tiny self, the tiny little vulnerable scared self. Some people were in ICUs when they were first born because they were born really sick. It's not uncommon to face the same karmic challenge as you're coming into this life as you were facing when you were going out of the previous life. That's very common. In fact, there are cosmic reasons for why that happens. But that's why it's not so uncommon for little tiny babies to face health or physical challenges as they're coming into this world. But when a little tiny person is in the ICU, it's like they're not feeling close to mama. They're not feeling the warmth and smelling this, smelling these familiar smells, something like that. It's all sterilized and cold and, So for those babies, those ICU babies, and I know we have angels here who go to the ICU and they sit with the babies even today when the mamas can't. Just feeling for those babies who felt isolated and alone, whether it was in an ICU, isolated, ICU, isolated, or whether it was just put away in another room at night, or when you're napping. Babies nap a lot. Oh, the baby's napping. I can finally do something. Well, I'll put them away in the other room. Rather than I'll sit here and hold this baby while they sleep so that they feel safe the whole time. It's quite the sacrifice. So just feeling that flow of the heart back to the tiny vulnerable self. It's a little child. Nothing is more important than feeling accepted and loved and sort of embraced by the loving community, the family around. And sometimes mothers and fathers are experiencing some kind of stressful, I'm sure plenty of that's happening in Eastern Europe at the moment. Little children noticing that mama and daddy are more on edge, and not having as much in the way of mental and emotional resources to be present. There are a lot of reasons why that happens. And one of them is that it's very tiring to be new parents. Because babies, they wake up a lot at night. It's just the way babies are. So mamas and daddies who are used to sleeping at night, like normal people, don't get to sleep at night. And they start to wear a little frazzle thin. Because it's not just one night, it's a marathon. It can go on for, a year or 2 years. It goes on for a while. And the mom and dad have to adapt. And what happens for some mommies and daddies is that the adaptation is not so easy, especially if they were already pushing themselves or if they had other influences in their life that were draining upon them. Then you start to add on top of that, like what's already a bit of a strain going on in life with not sleeping so well. And the next thing that happens is the mom and dad, they're not so present. They're not just able to be patient and present with the child. We've talked a lot about changes in the epigenome during early childhood, toddler years, and how this is the time that a little person's body creates. It establishes patterns in the electromagnetic soup that exists at a subcellular level of the body, and it's like the electromagnetic environment around the DNA. And this electromagnetic environment created by proteins, ionized proteins, is the epigenome. And it is like the software that tells the DNA, like the DNA is like the hardware of your computer. It's like the basic structure. And then the epigenome interacts, it's like the software, it interacts with the hardware, and it tells the hardware what to do. To every cell in the body has DNA, has the same DNA. The same DNA is in my eye cell, is in my finger cell, is in my tooth cell. It's the same DNA. It's completely, the whole DNA story is in every one of these. But this is very different from this. It's very different from that. There's information in the DNA that tells what the shape of the inside of my mouth should be, the space. It actually tells the cells how to arrange themselves so that the inside of the shape is a certain way. The inside of the space of the mouth is a certain way, different from everybody else's inside of their mouth. That is done by the epigenome, that nice electromagnetic array of ionized proteins that are kind of surrounding the DNA. And that electromagnetic array is affected by feelings. But most importantly, it's affected by feelings about who you are, definitions of who you are. Now we're looking a little more deeply into feelings that are those natural, spontaneous responses to environmental experiences, and how the parents are treating you and responding to you and reacting. Parents, grandparents, caregivers, siblings, all the people around. The most challenging, the one most challenging, is the one that strips you of your personal power. And of course, kids are hardly powerful, right? Kids, little kids, like they're so dependent upon mom and dad for literally everything. So, but of all the powers, obviously when someone's really tiny, they need someone to dress them and they need someone to get food for them and so like that. But the power that's most important for you to retain is the power to define yourself. The power to define yourself. And what a lot of times parents discover when their children are little is that if the parents possess that power to define the child, if they say to the child, well, you're either good or bad or loved or not loved or disposable or appreciated, depending on whether I say so or not. Lack of healthy boundary right there. So where the boundaries are and where the parents place the boundaries and where the child understands the boundaries to be. And that's the main thing that parents do, is they define boundaries for their children. Like that is probably the number one, if we want to isolate it back to its source, this is the number one thing that parents do. They define boundaries. There is a template for the definition of boundaries. And this template, I'm looking at it, it evolves. Of course it evolves, because as a person grows, boundaries change. When you're 5, you can't drive a car. But when you're 18, you can. And one would hope that you do. Otherwise, your parents are still driving you places, right? So the boundaries change, but there is a template. There is a template that connects the boundaries with what is appropriate for the level of cognitive development of the individual. The template is given this as we're focusing our awareness as a collective on this template. It is awakening for all of us. It is being received like a download. Even though it's the responsibility of the parents to define boundaries for the child, we all know that some parents are better at that than others. And it's very much a thing that can be passed from generation to generation. That if boundaries were violated at one level, at grandparent, great-grandparent, something like that, and then those boundaries are violated, then the next generation doesn't quite know where the boundaries are, and when they have children, they are also unable to establish the boundaries in the right place, and like that, it passes from one to the next. But this template is a universal template based upon the most accurate reflection of the surface of self, the most accurate reflection of wholeness at the surface, the most accurate reflection of totality or fullness, the unmanifest, unbounded ocean of being. We could say absolute truth. I think this is a point where the term truth comes in very nicely, is very important. It reflects truth, essential truth. This is where I have to make a point about truth. I just learned this week from a very nice YouTube video. And I'll see if I can find the reference for it and put it for you in the links. Could you make a note, please, that we will send the reference? Because there was some modern thinker who came up with this idea and they were really spot on. So I'm sharing it with you. It's not my idea, but it's important at this point that I give you the summary. And that is that there are three different kinds of knowledge. You could say truth or you could say knowledge. That's like really, you know the truth. When I say knowledge, it's like you knowing the truth. There's private knowledge. This is personal knowledge, private knowledge, and common knowledge. And the way it works is that we all have personal knowledge. Deep inside, when anything happens, even if you're facing a crossroads and you're not sure which way to go, or something is confusing and you don't understand why it's happening that way, somewhere deep inside you do understand. There's a level of each one of us where we're rooted into the source of creation, and we absolutely know what's right and what's wrong and what's correct and what's not correct. So part of the download that we're getting is related to the activation of personal knowledge. The problem with personal knowledge is it doesn't always fit with the collective. It doesn't always fit with the collective. I think earlier in the week we were talking about also the evolution of scientific knowledge is falling along these same paths at the moment. It's part of the larger transition that we're going through right now, of which I will be addressing later. The next webinar is about the big transition that we're going through. But yeah, I mean, to such a degree that the first man, Bruno was his name? Bruno when was he, the 1400s or something? 1600s. What was his first name? Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake because he insisted that the Earth and the planets were circling around the sun and that the stars were other suns. In those days, you didn't say things like that. It was personal knowledge for him. It was personal knowledge. But the collective wasn't buying it. Personal knowledge often evolves into private knowledge, where you find a few other awake souls Copernicus and other guys like that, who around you. Copernicus also suggested it before Bruno, but he knew that he would get in trouble for it, so he wrote it down, and he didn't let his work be published until after he was dead. It was very smart. It's very smart. So the thing about personal knowledge is that personal knowledge, even though it's true, can be sort of dangerous, can put you in a vulnerable position, can put you in a position where you feel like an outcast or time out from your tribe or whatever. But personal knowledge becomes private knowledge. Eventually, you find a few other souls with whom you can share your personal knowledge. And when you find a few other like-minded souls, then there are little whisperings back and forth. I think this is the truth. Oh yes, it seems also for me is also the truth. And it's like coming home when you find people with whom you can share your personal knowledge, right? Because it's like, oh, finally I found my tribe. I find someone who I don't have to go around like trying to hide my truth. I don't have to go around hiding my truth. It takes a lot of energy to hide your truth, right? Right. So, but there's this transition from private knowledge to common knowledge. And when truth goes from private knowledge to common knowledge, the whole world changes. Everything changes. Laws change, and customs change, and boundaries between nations change, and all kinds of things change. Big things change when the information goes from private to common. And the man who proposed this idea pointed out that there's always a catalyst. And the example was the emperor's new clothes, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with that story. And in the parade, when the emperor is going along the parade with no clothes on, and people are kind of privately whispering, I don't know, but I don't know if I know if he's got anything on. The child is the one. The child stands at the junction between private knowledge and common knowledge. Because the child has no hidden agendas. The child has no limitations on their senses of perception. If the blind man in the audience says, oh, I believe the emperor has no clothes. Does he have clothes on? He says, I can't see him with my spectacles. Nobody believes it. Everyone just, shuffles the other way. It's like, oh, I don't know. I think he's got clothes on, right? But the child comes forward with clear vision, clear senses of perception, unfettered by the stresses of life. And they also come forth in innocence, pure innocence. No hidden agendas, no manipulation, no intention to try to make things go a certain way, just so simple. I see it and I call it as it is, like that. And this is what the healing of the inner child does for all of us. The healing of the inner child brings back the part of ourself that knows us for who we actually, truly, really, sincerely are, and awakens that. I have another picture. So I had this really sweet lady. I'm looking at our time because we're just about at our question and answer time anyway. So this darling woman asked a question about that. And she said, I have a picture of myself to share. And she's sharing a picture of herself before her heart closed down, when she was in that place. And in this person who does the theory of the knowledge, they call it the missionary. They call that person, the person who still, Christ did that, right? Christ came to the world was sort of pure of intent and pure of perception and, seeking only the highest, something like that. So she said, oh, you can please share the picture of me when I was a little girl. So I'll share her picture. Let's see, screen share. No, not that one, sorry. There she is. So here's our little girl. Here's our little girl in Hawaii. She's so beautiful. And it's nice to see the image of a child like this because it's nice to see because she embodies that quality of still knowing who she genuinely, truly is in her pure potential, in her unbounded nature as an expression of absolute pure being before before the stresses click in. I'll see if I can does it here? Stop share. I'm going to try one more. I have one more. I have one more. Here's screen 2. Look at that little face. That's my face I see every day. That's my face. That's my girl. These beautiful girls. These beautiful girls. Is so much presence, so much awareness, so much complete connection to everything in creation without, yeah. So it is. So it is. When we send our awareness back through time and we connect in with our little tiny self, and the reason I'm giving you this is more of a sort of a general instruction, is because everybody's specific stresses from childhood are a little different. Another really important point that we touch on when, and I think it happens around the time of our little toddler girl from Hawaii over there, is there comes a point when a child realizes, and I've mentioned this before in other webinars, where a child realizes that they have to let go of a certain amount of or degree of investment in heaven, in the spirit realms, in the subtle levels of creation, in order to be fully present in this physical material world. And again, how much a child is expected to do that is very much dependent on those around them. If they, I grew up in the 60s, in the 1960s, and I'll tell you, if a child thought that they were going to talk about things spiritual or something like that to their little friends, share that level of their personal knowledge, I know because I tried, they become the subject of ridicule. You become taunted and teased and made fun of and put down, because that's the point where the message from the collective is either you're invested completely in this physical material level of creation or you're nothing. You can just go off and die. And of course we know that in centuries past, a lot of children didn't make it past that particular benchmark. And that generally happened around 3 to 4, 2 to 3 to 4, 3 to 4, usually around 3 to 4, which is about the point where children realize that not only are they separate from those around them, but their ability to use their will and their skill sets that they've developed at that early age to make the world become what they would like it to become, that there are limitations that cannot be overcome. There are limitations that you can't get past. There's certain things you can't do. When you're 4, you can't drive your parents' car. Maybe you could drive your little plastic car, but you can't drive mommy and daddy's car. You can't use knives to help mommy chop vegetables for lunch. You can't, because you're little. We don't want to see, we don't want people to get hurt. And so there comes this point where the child realizes that up to a certain point, they've been able to sort of manipulate their world and convince parents to do things certain ways and change the world. That happens from about 2 to 4. And then at around 4, there's some big barrier that crops up, and it's like, well, you know what? I'm going to have to let go of my desires. I'm going to have to adapt my desires to accommodate the boundaries and limitations of this world. And it's rough. It's a rough spot right there. So everybody's childhood experiences are a little different, and we're just about to dive in now and look at them. But for each one of you individually, because I know not everybody's putting questions up for me here, just know that your ability to send your awareness back through time and connect up to your little child self, either your little infant baby self or your little toddler self, your little crawling around the floor self, or your just young, very young child self. Every spot that needs healing is a spot where the sense of who you are needs to reconnect to wholeness. And by being established in wholeness now, in your present level of self, you bring that quality, and the awareness is wholeness. It carries that quality of wholeness back to the little tiny child self and supports the reestablishment of that subtle connection. It's so subtle that it doesn't necessarily rewrite history itself, but it rewrites the way you experience history. It provides the aspect of witnessing, so that when you go back to that little child experience, instead of being gripped by it and squeezed by it and shaped into a shape that made you feel separate from creation, the little child is able to kind of step back and witness, to share space with your present self, which is already coming back in a kind of witnessing capacity. And the little child self is able to enjoy sharing that witnessing perspective. And from the witnessing perspective, one is not gripped by, no matter how, like, even if it was like a terrible childhood illness or a trauma or tragedy, whatever it was, the little child is able to navigate through the experience without the experience coloring the sense of self in terms of separation, without the experience convincing you that you are somehow not part of God or not part of the wholeness of creation. It reestablishes connection back then. And that connection is one of the things that gives little children so much resilience. Because the ability to step back and witness experience it's easier in a child's pliable physiology, pliable nervous system. It's easier. Just letting that do what it needs to do. Just allowing that to happen, like a great healing for everyone in this live webinar, to go in and isolate those moments where the sense of self identified with suffering and you thought of yourself as, well, I don't deserve to be happy, or, well, I feel rejected, therefore I am not worth being accepted. Something like that, those types of experiences. And reestablishing wholeness, reestablishing absolute connection with the source of creation, an infinite resource of comfort and life-supporting impulses and intelligence and creativity and all that's good, so that your little self can leverage that experience, all those experiences, no matter whether you had it once or twice or whether you had many times this experience, your little self is then able to leverage the experience to fortify the anchor to the source of creation. Just establishing it. You're establishing it in yourself. Well done. It goes and it goes. And I see some people in this healing webinar reviewing in dream and sleep state. Very good, very good. When we review these healings in dream and sleep state, they become very nicely integrated. Okay, so let's get to these questions. Oh, there's only 7 minutes. As usual, though, I promise that tomorrow will just be all questions, and so I won't miss any, because I know there's no way I'm going to get through all the questions that are in from tonight. So I'll start in where I leave off, but I'll get through as many questions as I can tonight. Here's a very sweet lady says, many have grown up in very loving environments where children modeled behavior based on the example of giving and helping others as being the highest priority, perhaps even more important than self-care. Can we heal that pattern and establish the pattern of self-care, personal nourishment, and enlightenment as being the optimal and ultimate way of serving others in creation? It's so beautiful. It's almost like the answer is in the question, right? This is an example of not having boundaries in healthy places, right? That the idea here is that it's so our responsibility to the collective is so important, and it's so dominant in this physical material world that there's a justification in martyring yourself or sacrificing yourself for the sake of fulfilling the responsibility to the collective, of being on time and giving in the very best way that you can possibly give. I remember one time I was with a lady who there were problems there, and her thing was whenever we would leave her space, she would ask her little, very, very tiny toddler son to give something that was really important to him, to us, as a gift, as a parting gift. And she would often take whatever it was he was playing with at the moment, whatever toy he was playing with, and say, you know, you have to give this to these people who are leaving because that's what we do. We give, you know, we give away the things that we love. We give away the things that we love. And I was like, I would get home and I'm like, I did not want these crayons. What am I doing with these crayons? You know, but anyway, later I figured out that, you know, I just bring, you know, anyway, you figure out ways to handle it, but it's like that was sort of a parenting style, right? And that parent thought that they were really, really teaching their child something really, really valuable. They were teaching their child to give selflessly. But the problem is that things do not make friendships. And whatever we do giving, whatever we give, or however we sacrifice our time and energy and creativity and intelligence to help others, the gift is only valuable if there's no pinch associated with it, right? If I give you something and then I go home and cry for an hour because I didn't want to give, like it was too much for me, do you really want that gift? Do you really want to carry the karma of that gift? No, of course not. So it's the same principle here, that we need to have healthy boundaries, sensitive boundaries. And again, these boundaries already exist on the level of personal knowledge. It's just that sometimes the environment or the social situation, like with the little toddler boy who is always having to give my daughter and me his toys when we left the house, we left there, the environment was not allowing his personal truth to be the truth that dominated. It had to be his mother's truth was the one that dominated. And she was calling it the way she was calling it. And that was born out of stress. It was born from some stress in her system. And it was also born from layers of ancestral patterning as well, because that had come also to her from her parents, and so like that. So that it's clearing that type of patterning, and that type of behavior, that type of experience for a little toddler person causes a shift in their epigenome. It causes a shift in the electromagnetic spectrum around the DNA, and it causes them to grow up and form themselves in a specific manner. It causes their body to grow. Like growth hormones to release at certain times, different from what they would have otherwise if they had been able to stay in their truth, and just things like that. It affects things. So the patterning is the reestablishment of your personal truth, the validity of it, the reliability of it, and your personal trust in your personal truth. Trust in your personal truth. And not trusting in the personal truth comes from having given away the power to others. In the case of the mommy and the little child who had to give us his crayons, the story was, I won't love you if you don't give away your favorite toy. You give your favorite toy to these people, or I will not. I will rescind my love, and in doing so, I will define you as unlovable. What can a little child do? What can you do? You can reestablish your personal truth and your ability to fill in the blanks. To fill in, oh, well, mommy doesn't feel like I'm lovable right now. Well, that's okay. I still love myself. It's a tall order for a little child. That's a tall order because little children are deeply dependent upon their parents for everything. And so the child's nature, the child's dharma, is to be as attractive to the parents as possible, to be as unconditionally loving with the parents as possible, unconditionally accepting of whatever it is that the parents are presenting as possible. But wisdom wins out. Wisdom wins out. So the shift here is between the sense of common knowledge and personal knowledge, and at every point favoring personal knowledge. These are transition points in gaps. These are gaps in the thinking, gaps in the emotional landscape of the heart. Little places where there was a patterning to always favor the common knowledge, and now it's shifting to favor personal knowledge as wholeness, in the form of wholeness. We favor personal knowledge in the form of wholeness. It only works if personal knowledge is anchored to wholeness. Then it works. So the anchor is very important. Oh, why we have our 3 minutes of silence at the beginning of these sessions, right? Anchoring it in there. That anchor between what you know to be your essential truth and nature and the unmanifest, eternal, unbounded ocean of pure consciousness. Integrating in the gap. This integration, not disintegration, this integration in the gap is communicating to the epigenome. It's communicating bliss to the electromagnetic spectrum, which is the context or soup in which the DNA exists. And the reason this can happen is because it's happening as a conjoined process. It's happening as a team effort between yourself as an individual right now and yourself as an innocent child. Remember I was saying earlier, it's that quality of the child to be very innocent and without agendas and clear in perception that allows the knowledge to become solidified in creation. Well, it's the same in our own bodies. It's one thing to do to try to tell yourself or convince yourself of something of which you are not convinced. But it's something altogether different to have the pure catalyst accessible in yourself that shifts your essential absolute truth around to become the common truth of the body. Remember I was saying earlier that sometimes parts of this being can transcend, parts of the being can be yoked or centered in wholeness, but then other parts aren't. Well, what makes the difference between all the parts, like when it becomes like common knowledge, right? All the parts are centered and stabilized in wholeness. This is it. It's the child within us that acts as the missionary, as the person who did that theory of knowledge used that word, the missionary. It's the child, it's the innocent child who reflects clearly and purely your personal truth, your inner truth. And when that pure truth reflects all the way into the finest, most delicate, most abstract level of the physiology and the being, it becomes common knowledge throughout the whole physiology. Then the nervous system and all the other systems, but especially the nervous system, because the nervous system is such a anchor of awareness, and the nervous system is also the conductor of the orchestra. The conductor. I mean, the heart is also conductor of the orchestra, but it's the neural net around the heart that determines how the heart beats. Is that responsive? It translates the emotional responses in the being into neuropeptides, which then communicate to the cells. That's the nervous system doing that. All the cells create neuropeptides, all of them. Oh, it's the consciousness in the cells creating the neuropeptides. Okay. So the healing for the nervous system that's going on there is more with regards to healing the way we react and respond to the experiences that we have, so that rather than falling in the present, rather than falling into experiences of being gripped by negativity and self-identifying with that negativity and thinking, well, I'm useless or I'm hopeless or this is impossible. The nervous system is able to maintain that level of witnessing. It's up to the nervous system to do the witnessing. That's what it is. So that's establishing there for the nervous system. Good job, everyone. Establishing for the nervous system. And good job, everyone, for all these incredible questions. I only answered the questions that came in my emails tonight. I did so much talking, but I hope that some of the healings that we did tonight and some of the talking that I did actually address some of the questions that came in. But I will go through and look over all the questions in detail and absolutely answer them tomorrow. And we'll just start off right from the beginning of tomorrow's session answering questions so we get through all of them. And I'm really looking forward to that, because that often allows the Saturday session to roll out in nice little clean segments of different specific healings, which is always lovely. So I would like to thank everyone very much for being with me tonight. Oop, don't want to move my mic away too soon. Thank you all for being with me. It's been really something. It's been really something to be here, and I'll look forward to seeing you all tomorrow, if not in real time, in the recording afterwards. Enjoy the healings as they manifest for you in dream and sleep state tonight, because we covered a lot of territory and there were a lot of downloads that came through that were absolutely rife with information and packed. And so you'll get a chance to unpack those in your dream and sleep state if you haven't already. All right, everybody, thank you for being with me. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Good night. Bye-bye. Thank you.